Hello, welcome back to another video. This is Manchester's lost island of Pomona. Now I call it a lost island because for the past 30 or so years it's been stood completely empty, sort of derelict, and nature's kind of reclaimed it, if you like. And I call it an island because on the one side over here you've got the Bridgewater Canal, and over there you've got the Manchester Ship Canal, sort of River Irwell, and it's a strip of land that sits in between those two bodies of water. Now it's got quite a history that extends further back than when it was a docklands area, and we'd have to go back to the 1830s, 1840s, and it also goes back to the origins of the name Pomona, the history. So if you'll allow me, I'll tell you the story. Now, from what I understand, the earliest history goes back to the 1830s, 1840s, and the canal would have been there, and the Manchester Ship Canal would have just probably been the natural River Irwell. But there was a private house on this land, and it had extensive gardens, and those gardens were known as the Cornbrook Strawberry Gardens. And from what I understand, it used to attract people. They used to attract visitors to the strawberry gardens, and it became a bit of a place to visit. Now in 1845, Joseph and William Beardsley had seen the Cornbrook Strawberry Gardens and decided that they were going to buy it and try to make something of it. Also, because of where it was in Manchester, it's just to the west of the city centre, and the prevailing wind comes in from the west, so all the smog and the dirt and the smoke is blown in the opposite way to Pomona. So they bought the gardens and they decided to turn it into the Pomona Botanical and Zoological Gardens. Now the name Pomona, where does that come from? Well, Pomona is the Roman goddess of orchards, fruit trees and gardens. So that's where the name came from, Pomona. Now the Pomona Botanical Gardens proved to be very popular, and hundreds of people came. They came from Manchester city centre, they came on omnibuses and they came on boats. And the boats, they boarded the boats down at the cathedral arches, just near the cathedral arches, and I'll take you there in a moment. You could go down some steps, board a boat and come down here, down the River Irwell, and visit the Pomona Botanical Gardens. So just behind me here, this is the River Irwell, and you'll see on the wall opposite are some arches. Those are the cathedral arches. And there's a huge space behind those, and they've been used for various things over the years. Second World War, there was air raid shelters behind there. But against the wall was a staircase with stairs. There used to be stairs that came down that led to jetties, and people used to board boats here and take trips down to Pomona Island. So these boat trips apparently were very popular, and as I'm reading up on this stuff about Pomona, I picked up a couple of phrases or a couple of amusing things. One of them was that Pomona, and I don't know when it was in its history, whether it was early on or later when it became a big popular palace and amusement place, that Pomona was a place where young people went and they could go there and drink and dance unsupervised by adults. And what was the other one? Typical Victorian statement to a girl: you don't want to be one of those girls that hangs around at Pomona Island or Pomona Palace. So it just sounds like it was, you know, like any amusement place, any entertainment place. It drew the young crowds and it was very popular, but obviously saw some life as well. Now, because of the competition across town at Belle Vue, Pomona Gardens made a big thing about the clean air because it was in the west of the city, and they would say things like, it's like going to a countryside fete without the need for a long journey, and it's far, far from the ill air of Manchester and Salford. Of course, don't forget, the Industrial Revolution is taking place now. Factories are sprouting up everywhere, smoke, smog, coal dust in the air. The winds are blowing this way, they're blowing all the bad air that way. Pomona's in that direction, and they really tried to exploit the clean air. It seems odd now because obviously we take clean air for granted, But back in Victorian times, early Victorian times, 1800s, the ability to be able to breathe easy without breathing in smog and dirt was a big thing, and they really tried to exploit that. Like I say, they were really popular, and they boasted the following, and I'll read it to you. A shooting gallery, a billiard room, a camera obscura, flying swings, a bowling green and a hedge maze. People loved it. They came in the hundreds. Now, there was competition, and the competition was across town, and it was Belle Vue. And Belle Vue was developing now as a zoo, and they had animals. So I think Pomona was always the poor relation to Belle Vue, but that was about to change. Now, from what I understand, and if legend has it right, the following events took place. There was a man called James Riley. Now, James Riley was quite an aspiring character. He thought quite a lot of himself, and he was quite aspirational, and he was quite ambitious. Now, they had firework displays at Belle Vue and at Pomona, but at Belle Vue, after the firework displays, they had like a dance in the ballroom there. And one particular night, James Riley, after watching the firework display, went to go to the dance in the ballroom. Now, the door policy at Belle Vue was to not allow the hoi polloi in, because they wanted to keep it quite refined and quite nice. And unfortunately, James Riley was refused entry. And being a man of aspiration and thinking quite a lot of himself, he was fuming, absolutely furious. And so he went away and he devised a plan. And his plan would be to create something better than Belle Vue. And sure enough, in 1868, he bought Pomona Gardens for £75,000. And that, the sequences of events of that night were to transform Pomona for the next 30 years. Now, when James Riley decided that he would pour money into Pomona and change it as a rival to Belle Vue, it was incredible. He built the Pomona Palace. Now, it's difficult to get your head around just how wonderful and grand this building was, the Pomona Palace. I'll give you some dimensions. It was 216 feet long by 220 feet wide. It was built with a 100-foot clock tower. Inside, it could hold an orchestra with an orchestra pit that could fit in it 100 performers. On the ceiling in the Great Hall, there were painted figures of Mars, Venus, Neptune, Vulcan, and of course, Pomona. It was 4 times bigger than the Royal Albert Hall in London. It also had a great big agricultural hall with it where they held horse shows, agricultural shows, and all sorts of events. It truly was wonderful, and one of the difficult things is to get your head around the fact that this place has gone, and it's gone without a trace. I just find it incredible that such a wonderful thing that Manchester had has gone forever, but I'll tell you why it's gone forever soon in this video. Now, from the 1860s for the next 30 years, so it's written, Pomona Palace was one of the most important places in Britain. As well as staging horse shows, agricultural shows, there was massive political rallies there. In 1869, Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli addressed a crowd of up to 100,000 people, and there was many, like I say, political rallies, speakers, and great events. In 1887, the Royal Jubilee exhibition was held at the Pomona Palace, and it was a great showcase for Manchester's industry, and they showed the best of what they could do. Now, as well as political rallies, there was lots of entertainment that went on. Blondin came here. I think he was a famous tightrope walker. So Blondin came to the Pomona Palace and performed. I've read up that Wallet, the Queen's jester, came to perform for the masses. Now, I'd have thought the 1800s was probably a bit late for the Queen to have a jester, but nonetheless, Wallet, the Queen's jester, performed here. Now, there was a sinister side to some of these shows, because some of the shows were these anthropological shows where they took tribes from abroad and brought them and displayed them. In 1874, The Guardian wrote that some genuine Indians from the far west of the Pawnee tribe were coming to Pomona Palace, and their dances and their war songs would no doubt cause great amusement for the gentry. There was also a man called Carl Hagenbach, and he was apparently renowned and he brought a load of people over from Ceylon and toured around Britain just displaying the people, I think probably in cages. So this was the downside of some of the entertainment that was at Pomona, but it was, at the time, that's what they did. I'm not saying it was right, but that was one of the things that they did. And it must have been quite a tragedy for the people. And I often wonder, those people that were displayed, what became of them? Did they ever make it back to where they came from? Or did they end up settling in Britain or in Europe? It makes you wonder, doesn't it? About the 1880s, the Industrial Revolution was in full flow. And where Pomona was, just in the west of the city, it was no longer in this idyllic, wonderful, almost countryside-like place, because the factories and industrialisation was starting to creep in. And Pomona, the botanical gardens, found themselves surrounded by factories. And it was one of these factories that was going to seal Pomona's fate forever. Now, one of the factories that was so near to the Pomona Palace was Robertson Dale's chemical factory. The 22nd of June 1887, there was an explosion, a massive explosion, and it was to damage Pomona Palace and seal its fate forever. So what happened? Well, I'll tell you. Ironically, one of the employees of the chemical factory was over at the Pomona Gardens drinking during his lunchtime. He must have got quite inebriated, because he went back to work into the chemicals factory, back to where he was working. Now, he worked with a stove that made picric acid. Now, I'd never heard of picric acid, but apparently it's widely used in industry, and it's very, very flammable and very explosive. Goes back to the stove, gets his pipe, lights his pipe, there's an explosion. Well, there's two explosions. The first explosion causes a fire. Now, the guy with the pipe is dead now, but there's a fire. A young lad that works at the factory called James Martin runs over to fight the fire. But there's a second explosion, and it's massive, and that kills James Martin. Now, that second massive explosion damaged the Pomona Palace, and I've got a picture of the inside of it with all the wallpaper hanging off, from what I can make out, and it caused a lot of extensive structural damage to the Pomona Palace. And that was it. That was the end of Pomona Palace. So what happened after the explosion? Well, in 1888, after struggling on for another year, the Pomona Gardens finally closed the doors. And James Riley was paid £75,000 for the entire complex. The area had already been identified as prime dockland. And so in 1888, Pomona's fate changed again, and a new chapter began, where the whole area was to become one of Manchester's major docks. So after 1888, for the next 85 years, this place is a docks, and I'm sure thousands of people worked here, and there's hundreds of stories, and there really were some huge ships that came in here. In fact, our favourite film, A Taste of Honey, one of the scenes was shot down here, so I'll see if I can find it for you, that scene now. So this is taken from the film A Taste of Honey, and our character Jo, played by Rita Tushingham, has just left school and she's decided to go and have a wander down by the docks. Now, it's quite a brilliant film to watch because it's filmed around Manchester in 1959-1960. The film came out in 1961, but you can see Pomona Docks, how it was, the size of the ships, and so I'll just leave you with it so you can watch.
So there you go, there it is on the maps, side by side maps, 1888 on the left, modern day on the right. Only number 3 dock is left, the rest have been filled in. Number 3 dock has a little entrance to through a lock to the Bridgewater Canal. A couple of points of interest on the map on the left hand side that we've covered before. You'll see the big railway sidings, you'll see the salt works where I am now. You'll see Throstle's Nest Junction, which has appeared in another video of mine. So there you go, that's how it looked back in the day when it was an actual docks.
Now I've just come out here to one of the ends of one of the piers. Is that what they're called, piers? And this is the only bit of the docks that's still sort of a full docks, or as it would have been. The rest of them that go that way have been filled in. But I've come out to this point here. If you see this little mooring point here for the ships, I want to show you that. Remember that. And again now, through courtesy of Time Picks, I want to take you back to 1946. Just look at the block there, and look at that view, and look at the chimney that has now been capped. So come the 70s, the dreaded 70s, and industry goes into decline in Britain, doesn't it? And Pomona, the docks, went into decline as well. And I think about 1973 it was closed as a docks, and since 73 it stood completely empty as a scrubland, as a former brownfield site, and nature has slowly reclaimed it. Apparently there's all sorts of rare birds, there's herons here, there's wild flowers here. I found some poppies growing here last year. Now, in the late 70s there was a bit of a reprieve because entertainment came back to Pomona. Some business people brought a decommissioned Isle of Wight ferry and parked it along here somewhere, I'm not quite sure where, but it was like an entertainment ship, and there was a restaurant on there, a dance floor. I'll just read for you. It had a canal room restaurant, the Botanical bar, and of course a dance floor, and it was actually quite popular. I think it was called Westward Ho. Now it was so popular that on this theme of like doing wacky things, the owners decided to buy a decommissioned de Havilland Comet aircraft, and that was parked on the island as well, and that had a restaurant in it and a dance floor and all the rest of it. I think that was popular until about 1981, and finally the ship and the plane were scrapped, and then Pomona stands again, unwanted, unloved, and reclaimed by nature, and it is what you see today. So that's it, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you get a chance, come down here, because it really is quite a peaceful place at times, and there's lots of blackberries growing here at the moment. But the future for Pomona is bleak. Well, bleak for me, because basically it's been earmarked now as prime real estate land, and they're going to build hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of apartments here, as you would imagine. Now that we know the history, there's kind of like that longing that we just want it to stay as like this lovely romantic island that's being reclaimed by nature with this wonderful, wonderful backstory. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.